Welcome to The Debate. When we analyze interpersonal predators, society conditions us to look for, the obvious threat. We expect the danger to be loud, aggressive, and just entirely overt.
Right, we look for the grandiose arrogance. It is a comfortable archetype, honestly, because it allows us to believe we would spot the threat a mile away, right? And just protect ourselves accordingly.
Exactly. But when you step into the hidden world of covert narcissism, the behavioral profile completely inverts. They do not present as a predator, they present as a wounded bird.
Yes, oh, absolutely.
They mask their grandiosity under this shy, introverted, highly sensitive, or even deeply depressed persona. They weaponize vulnerability.
Which is exactly what trips victims up.
Right. And when a target finally attempts to leave a romantic relationship, or initiate a high-conflict divorce, or just set a firm boundary in a workplace dispute, that fragile facade drops. The narcissist orchestrates a highly calculated, predatory annihilation of the target's reality. So today, we are decoding the anatomy of the narcissistic smear campaign.
It is the absolute definition of psychological quicksand for the victim. Because, the smear campaign is designed so that the harder you try to defend your character, the faster you sink into their engineered narrative.
Well, our discussion today is grounded in clinical psychology literature, legal analyses of high-conflict personalities, and trauma-informed frameworks that detail exactly how these campaigns operate and, crucially, how targets can survive them.
Which is no small feat.
No, it isn't. And this brings us to our central disagreement today. Should a narcissistic smear campaign primarily be understood and countered as a calculated structural war of attrition requiring meticulous legal and reputational defense?
Or is it fundamentally a psychological manifestation of profound fragility, where the most effective countermeasure is deep emotional disengagement and somatic healing?
Right. And I argue that the smear campaign is a highly structured, predatory information operation. It absolutely must be met with strategic documentation, systemic boundaries, and aggressive legal countermeasures.
And I argue that this behavior stems from a desperate, fragile ego that is reacting to a profound narcissistic injury. Therefore, the ultimate defense is psychological. The target must prioritize nervous system regulation over fighting a structural war that, frankly, ultimately only feeds the abuser's desperate need for attention.
Well, as a behavioral profiler, I look at the mechanics of the act. Smear campaigns are not impulsive tantrums. They just aren't. They are calculated preemptive strikes. Covert narcissists meticulously mask an intense underlying entitlement.
They do, but...
And when their control over a target is threatened, they draw on a highly effective, highly predictable playbook. The clinical literature highlights how these abusers employ tactics like DARVO, right? Deny, attack, reverse victim, and defender. And they don't use it just as an interpersonal quirk. It's a mechanism to systematically dismantle the target's credibility.
It's devastating.
It is. They use procedural flooding in family courts. They weaponized institutional policies. Because the attack is systemic and structural, the response must be equally tactical. You cannot out-therapize a frivolous lawsuit. The victim has to build a fortress of facts through objective, trackable documentation and rely on structural escalation to survive.
See, I come at it from a different way. You are looking at the external mechanics, but we have to analyze the actual psychopathology of the instigator to really understand how to defeat it.
Okay.
We are dealing with an individual driven by an intense need for narrative control, and that's fueled by pathological low self-esteem and shame deflection. The covert narcissist is structurally incapable of taking responsibility.
Sure, I agree with that.
Right. So if you fight a purely structural war like matching motion for motion in court or responding to every single false allegation, you are playing directly into their pathology. You are providing them with narcissistic supply.
But you have to defend yourself.
The true battleground is internal. The target must heal the secondary wounds of betrayal. If you don't heal the nervous system and starve the abuser of emotional supply through total psychological disengagement, no amount of legal documentation will give you your life back.
Well, let's dissect the anatomy of the attack itself, because the way a covert narcissist constructs a smear campaign relies on a highly sophisticated blend of outright fabrication and selective truth.
Yeah, the selective truth is the hardest part.
Exactly. We see covert gaslighting at its absolute finest here. They will take a natural period of grief or anxiety you're experiencing, perhaps something they deliberately caused, right, through subtle micro-insults and the silent treatment.
Oh, the silent treatment is classic.
Right. And they reframe your distress to mutual friends as psychological instability. They use weaponized incompetence to push you to the absolute brink of frustration behind closed doors. Then, when you finally snap and raise your voice, they record your reaction and play the ultimate victim to the outside world.
Wait, look at how they use pity in that specific dynamic. That is not genuine depression or distress on their part when they play the recording to your friends. That is weaponized guilt.
Absolutely.
A theater of victimhood. The invisible red flags victims miss for years are suddenly illuminated. I mean, the victim spent years walking on eggshells to avoid triggering the narcissist. And now the narcissist is using that very dynamic to paint the victim as the abuser.
And every theater needs an audience, right? The covert narcissist rarely gets their own hands dirty in the smear campaign. They outsource the harassment to what the literature terms flying monkeys.
Yes.
It's this recruited network of manipulated rescuers, complicit enablers, and malicious co-conspirators. The narcissist utilizes Darvo to completely invert reality. They deny their abuse, attack your credibility, and reverse the roles so you look like the villain. It functions exactly like an autoimmune response in a social circle.
That's a great way to put it. It perfectly captures the tragedy of the manipulated rescuer. Because, the people turning against the target aren't usually malicious. They are highly empathetic individuals who have been conned.
Exactly.
The covert narcissist exploits that empathy. They cry, they feign helplessness, they present themselves as so deeply wounded that these third parties feel a moral obligation to step in. But, and this is important, we have to be careful not to frame this as a mastermind sitting in a lair plotting the destruction of your social life.
I mean, it certainly looks like a plot.
But if we treat them like evil masterminds, don't we give them too much power? Aren't these flying monkeys often just highly empathetic people who have been conned by a pathetic display of fake victimhood? Darvo is often a deeply ingrained, almost reflexive cognitive distortion.
Reflexive?
Yes. To protect a fundamentally shattered, fragile ego, the narcissist genuinely rewrites their own memory of events. They actually believe their delusions of victimhood in that moment, because the alternative, admitting their profound shame and inadequacy, would trigger a total narcissistic collapse. It's an ego survival mechanism, not a military strategy.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective. If it were merely a clumsy reflex, the timing wouldn't be so impeccable.
Well,
Whether the instigator consciously recognizes it as a military strategy or deploys it as a reflexive defense mechanism, the outcome is identical to a coordinated information operation. And if an empathetic friend can be conned by this theater of victimhood, consider what happens when that exact same theater is performed in front of institutions.
Right. The systemic level.
The manipulation of individuals scales up seamlessly to the manipulation of systems. Family courts, for instance, are fundamentally blind patterns of coercive control. A judge looks for discrete incidents, right? A date, a time, a physical altercation, a police report. The covert narcissist exploits this architectural flaw perfectly.
Our legal and corporate systems are profoundly ill-equipped to handle covert psychological abuse. The systems demand linear narratives, and psychological abuse is cyclical and invisible.
Which is exactly why the narcissist leans into procedural flooding. This is the mechanism where they weaponize the legal paperwork itself. They file continuous ex parte motions, demand endless and irrelevant financial discovery, and just drag out mediation for months.
It's exhausting.
And that's the point. The goal isn't to win the motions. The goal is to drive the target's $50,000 legal retainer to zero. They exhaust the target financially, so they default on the actual custody hearings. They exploit the societal mother myth in familial abuse, suggesting that if a child is alienated, one parent must be inherently unstable.
It's incredibly dark.
And in the workplace, they deploy a 4-phase corporate playbook. Phase 1, they cultivate an alliance with HR by playing the overworked, stressed employee.
Phase 2, they bait the target using weaponized incompetence, deliberately dropping the ball on shared projects.
Right, so the target reacts.
Exactly.
Phase 3, they document the target's inevitable frustration, framing it as a hostile work environment. And Phase 4, they launch a preemptive strike. They file a formal grievance to lock the target into a defensive posture. The system itself becomes the abuser's most powerful flying monkey.
The systemic failure is undeniable, but you are focusing on the lost job or the drained bank account, whereas the true devastation is what this institutional betrayal does to the victim's neurobiology.
The neurobiology is secondary if you are homeless.
No, but listen, when you realize that the person who abused you in secret has now successfully turned your community, your HR department, or a judge against you, it triggers profound threat physiology in the brain. Bessel van der Kolk's work on trauma outlines this clearly.
Right. The body keeps the score. Exactly. The amygdala hijacks the prefrontal cortex. The victim's nervous system goes into an absolute overdrive of hypervigilance. The body loses the ability to distinguish between a defamatory email and a physical predator standing in the room. You can't sleep, your cortisol levels are permanently spiked, and you are constantly scanning your environment for the next attack.
I understand the biological toll, but the institutional betrayal is just the catalyst. The real war is the biological trauma happening under the target's skin.
Look, somatic healing and nervous system regulation are crucial components of recovery. I'm not denying that. But they will not stop a narcissist from hiding marital assets in offshore accounts or filing frivolous motions to have your children taken away.
But you have to be regulated to fight back. If you're listening to this and you've been through family court, you are probably screaming at your dashboard right now, because you know that if you walk into a courtroom highly regulated, deeply zen, and detached, an aggressive opposing counsel will frame your calmness as apathy.
Size. That does happen.
They will tell the judge your lack of emotion proves you don't care about your kids. Somatic healing is crucial, but it won't stop a narcissist from bankrupting you. Doesn't the target have to engage the structural fight to survive? You can have a perfectly regulated nervous system and still end up alienated from your children because you failed to counter the smear campaign on paper.
But if your nervous system is trapped in a loop of sheer panic, you cannot fight that structural war effectively. You will succumb to reactive abuse. You will send that angry, defensive, multi-paragraph text message at 2 in the morning trying to defend your character.
Well, you definitely shouldn't do that.
But that's what happens. And what does a narcissist do? They immediately screenshot it, print it out, and hand it to the judge as empirical proof that you are the erotic, unstable one. You have to regulate the nervous system first, not as a replacement for legal defense, but as the prerequisite for it. You have to stop reacting so you can begin responding.
Okay, that tension brings us to the most critical part of this analysis, the counter strategy. How does a target actually survive being trapped between failing institutions and a damaged nervous system? I argue for the absolute necessity of building a fortress of facts.
A fortress of facts.
Yes, you remove emotion from the equation and replace it with objective documentation. You limit all communication to written, trackable formats. For co-parenting, you mandate the use of tools like Our Family Wizard, where every message is logged, time-stamped, and run through a tone monitor that the court can access.
Which is a great tool, yes.
You take decisive legal action. You utilize cease and desist letters to establish hard boundaries. In the professional realm, you utilize online reputation management firms. You don't try to delete the internet. You use SEO optimization to suppress defamatory digital content by flooding search results with positive factual assets. You cannot sit quietly and hope the truth prevails when a covert narcissist is systematically destroying your professional livelihood.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why engaging in that level of structural warfare is a trap. You are advocating for engaging with the attack, which provides the exact currency the narcissist requires to survive, narcissistic supply.
It's not supply, it's defense.
It is supplied to them. The source material explicitly warns against the severe risks of going nuclear. When victims attempt to publicly expose the narcissist, when they send the cease and desists, when they aggressively defend themselves to every flying monkey who questions them, it almost always backfires.
If done emotionally, sure.
Even structurally, It proves to the narcissist that they have power over your reality. It gives the abuser the exact reaction they need to tell the community. Look how obsessed they are with me. Look how aggressively they are retaliating.
I am not advocating for a messy, emotional Facebook rant to clear one's name. I am advocating for a surgical, clinical, structural defense.
But even a surgical defense keeps you in the narcissist's orbit. You are still organizing your life, your finances, and your energy around their actions. This is why I champion the gray rock method.
The gray rock method.
Yes, you make yourself as uninteresting, unresponsive, and emotionally barren as a gray rock. You become a black hole for their provocations. In the workplace, this means being professionally present but emotionally entirely absent.
And just take the abuse?
It's not taking the abuse. If they send a highly inflammatory, manipulative email accusing you of incompetence, you do not defend your character, you reply with a single, emotionally flat sentence regarding the project deadline. The ultimate victory is not a legal win.
I think many people would disagree with that.
It is not restoring your reputation with people who were willing to doubt your character in the first place. The ultimate victory is reaching a neurobiological baseline where the narcissist provocations simply bounce off you without triggering a trauma response. You starve them of their supply until they are forced to seek it elsewhere.
See, I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning, because gray rocking only works if the narcissist eventually gets bored and walks away. But vindictive, covert narcissists facing a profound narcissistic injury often do not get bored.
Sometimes they don't. That's true.
They escalate. If you don't establish an unyielding structural boundary, like a defamation suit, a strict court order, or a formal HR mandate, they will interpret your silence as a green light. They will keep pushing, keep fabricating, and keep recruiting flying monkeys until they destroy your credibility entirely. You have to raise the cost of their behavior to a level they are unwilling to pay.
Raising the costs requires capital, financial, emotional, and psychological capital that the victim usually just does not have left. We're talking about targets who have endured years of insidious micro-insults, isolation, and covert gaslighting. Their cognitive load is maxed out. They are running on empty.
I know, but they have to fight.
If we tell them their survival depends on launching a massive legal and reputational counteroffensive, we are setting them up for a complete breakdown. The healing has to come from radical acceptance. You must accept that you cannot control the narcissist's narrative. You must accept that some people in your community will choose to believe the lies, and you have to let them go. You choose to walk away and rebuild your own reality entirely independent of the abuser's delusions.
It is a fascinating and, frankly, agonizing tension. On one hand, we have the sheer necessity of protecting one's material reality, right? Career, finances, custody. On the other, the desperate necessity of protecting one's psychological reality and preserving one's sanity.
Exactly.
So, as we summarize our positions today, I maintain that narcissistic smear campaigns are calculated, predatory information operations. Because the covert narcissist utilizes systems manipulating courts, HR departments, social media algorithms, the target must protect their livelihood by mastering those same systems. Survival depends on building an impenetrable fortress of facts and responding with overwhelming structural defense.
And I maintain that while structural defenses definitely have their place, we cannot lose sight of the pathology driving the attack. The core of this smear campaign targets the ego and the nervous system. The narcissist isn't truly after your money or your job. They are after your emotional reaction to validate their own fragile existence. True protection comes from psychological disengagement, somatic healing, and refusing to play their game. When you heal the trauma and eliminate the emotional supply, the smear campaign loses its psychological power over you.
I think where we fundamentally converge is on the reality of the experience itself. A smear campaign is a profoundly destabilizing experience of secondary betrayal. It is deeply unfair that the victim is tasked with managing the fallout of someone else's pathology.
So unfair.
And navigating it successfully requires a monumental shift from a reactive, emotionally flooded state to a highly strategic, unemotional response.
You have to stop explaining yourself to people who are committed to misunderstanding you. The energy spent defending your reality is exactly the energy they are trying to steal.
Well said. There is so much more to explore in this clinical literature regarding high-conflict personalities, the dark psychology of covert abuse, and the urgent need for institutional reform to properly recognize these invisible patterns of control. We leave it to you, the listener, to consider which approach, the structural fortress of facts or the psychological gray rock, best empowers you in your own context.
Because when the wounded bird suddenly drops the mask and reveals their predatory nature, your survival depends not on desperately trying to prove the truth to a forest that refuses to see it, but on knowing exactly how to fortify your own mind.
Thank you for joining us on The Debate. We will see you next time.